Hello, and welcome to the Atheist Experience. Today is February 11th, and I'm your host, Tracie Harris. With me today is John Iacoletti.
Hello.
Hello. The Atheist Experience is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, a Texas nonprofit educational organization dedicated to promoting separation of church and state and positive atheist culture. So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. We had a little bit of a snow day today.
It was wild.
Freezing rain this morning, but it didn't seem to really have accumulated too much. And hopefully by the time we get out of here, it won't be ice city, but we'll see.
We had hail for a bit. It was kind of crazy. We just heard a big thunderclap, and then hail started coming down, which I was informed that it was not technically hail, but large sleet. So apparently there's a difference.
Yeah.
And you actually had something that you wanted to start out with today.
Yeah, this is a segment that I like to call We Get Mail. And I got this, I'm not sure if anybody else got it. I can't imagine that he would single me out in particular, but this is from David in White Plains, and I thought I would respond on the air because that way it saves me from having to write him back. But he included a whole bunch of very helpful brochures and pamphlets from Ray Comfort and
okay.
And he sent it to where my wife works, which is a little creepy. He must have been doing a little stalking.
That's a lot creepy. I'm just gonna say that as a rule, if you're a viewer, that's probably not cool.
Yeah, I mean, right to the ACA, that 1507 West Koenig Lane. That's the best place to write to us if you want to write to us.
Yeah, the show page actually has contact information that's there if you want to contact someone on the show. So I encourage you to use that if you really have, a desire to reach out.
Yeah. But David says, "Dear John, how are you? We don't know each other, but God knows both of us as well as everyone in the world, both living and dead, even those souls still yet to be born in the world." And by the way, every paragraph is in a different color. So.
It's a very colorful piece.
God created you in his image and likeness, and he loves you dearly. God has a plan and purpose for your life, and he wants you to be saved from burning forever in the lake of fire with Satan and his demons. Just imagine that. Okay, so God loves you so dearly that you will burn in a lake of fire forever if you don't worship him. So that's
love.
That's how he loves you dearly, yes. Just imagine that, burning forever in the lake of fire with Satan and his demons. Forever. What an awful thought. And yet, sadly, that is where all who reject God's offer of salvation will find themselves. I do not want you to go there, nor for any other atheist to go there. I'm sure that you think that this is all fictional, some kind of delusional fantasy or ancient Jewish folklore, but I assure you that it is reality. So he assures us, and we should just take his word for it that it's reality because he's sure about it.
Maybe he's been there.
Well, that could be. I'm curious as to what caused you to become an atheist. Okay, I've never actually become an atheist. I've always been an atheist because I've never become a theist.
Right.
So like everybody, I was born not believing in a God. The difference is that nobody that I trust ever told me there was a God. So I never became an atheist.
Theist.
I've never.
Oh, you never became an atheist or a theist.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
You were. Oh, yeah. Okay, I misunderstood. Okay.
Yeah, I never. There was never a point in my life that I was a theist and I became an atheist.
Right.
Do you really think this all came from nothing? And then, most of the brochures he sent me were Ray Comfort. A building implies that there was a builder, and a tree implies that there was a creator. And
it's when did you stop beating your wife? Yeah. Right? It's that kind of a question.
Well, and that's, do believers really think that that's a compelling argument? That, because a tree is there, that they're, therefore Jesus? I don't, there's a disconnect there. It's you want to try to get your foot in the door by saying, well, here's this thing that exists, therefore a God must have created it, therefore it must be my God, therefore Jesus died for your sins. So, and then he goes on and says that we're we're very much alike. I don't want to read it all because it seems very irrelevant. He says, we've both laughed, we've both loved, we've both been rejected, we both cried. I don't see how that
he's
has
basically
anything
describing, elements of the human experience.
Yeah, we're both humans, therefore
Yes.
God. Okay. And then, he finishes up by saying, please read the gospel tracts enclosed in this envelope. I'm sure they will touch your heart if you let them. I look forward to hearing back from you, but if I don't, I will understand. I'm sure that you have a lot to do in your personal and professional life, but keep in mind that one day you will stand before the God of the universe to give an account of the life you lived while on this earth. So, fear is not a particularly good motivator for somebody who doesn't believe in that thing. So, if I came to you, David, and I said, if you don't believe in Thor, he's going to crush your skull with his hammer, or if you don't kiss Hank's ass, he's going to come and beat the shit out of you.
I guess I have a question.
You have to kind of believe in those things to begin with for that fear to motivate you in any way. So if you don't fear Thor bringing his hammer down on you, why should I believe that your God is going to burn me in a lake of fire? It's, why do you think that that's compelling? It would only be compelling for somebody who already believed that thing to begin with.
If it comes down, though, to accepting or not accepting Jesus, why would anyone be asked to give an account of their life? Wouldn't there only be a single question? Did you or did you not accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior? Yes or no? You get into heaven, you don't get into heaven, right?
Well, it probably depends on your particular stripe of Christianity.
Right, but I'm just saying that even that, but my point is, an account of your life implies that, decisions that you made, things that you did, whether or not you hurt people, and all of that really isn't relevant. What's relevant is, did you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior?
And then you kind of get a get out of hell free card for anything else that
You're
you might have
forgiven,
to account for.
And according to the once saved, always saved crowd, if you were truly saved, you would have lived the good life, so there'd be no point going through it, because you would be saved. And if you weren't truly saved, you would not have lived a good life, and therefore there would be no point going through that. It would just be a matter of, were you saved or were you not saved?
Okay.
Right?
So yeah.
There's no point giving an account of your life. That would just be a big waste of time before I'm thrown into a pit of fire by the God that loves me.
Yeah. Dearly.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks for writing, David.
Yeah, thanks for the threats. And
I'm sorry that I don't find your argument very compelling, but you kind of expected that. I'm not sure why you bothered.
Yeah.
But just telling us what you believe is going to happen isn't particularly persuasive.
I feel that it's more valuable when people love me because they love me, not because I threaten them.
Care about your well-being.
That's just me. But
right, if I love my children and they misbehave, I'm not going to allow a stranger to come in the door and hold their hand on a hot stove.
Right.
To show how much I love my children and want the best for them. So
if you don't want this to happen again, you might want to love me.
Yeah.
So
anyway.
Should we roll into calls?
Let's roll.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start here with Teddy in Gainesville. You're on. Hi, you're on with Tracie and John.
Hey, Teddy.
Hey, I've been trying to call for a while.
Well, your topic is actually extremely appropriate to that last letter. So, feel free. Go ahead. Let's hear what you've got on your mind today.
Well, I was an agnostic for the majority of my life, and my father died. It was in 2016, and at the time I didn't become religious, and I didn't expect to. And somewhat recently, probably about 6 months ago, I just became very, very afraid of hell. And which is very strange because I really didn't come from a background that believed in that, and I didn't do it. And I read a bunch of apologetic literature and a bunch of counter-apologetic literature, and I've been going back and forth with it. And generally speaking, most of the arguments don't convince me, but I'm still... I guess I still kind of do believe in a hell, even if I don't believe in a God, as silly as that is.
Can I ask you something? I might have missed it, but let me just check in here. So you say that this fear of hell kind of developed suddenly in about 6 months ago?
Yeah.
Is that
probably,
correct? I mean, I understood that
Yeah.
correctly. So I guess my question is, what happened 6 months ago?
Honestly, I don't think it was rooted to any particular thing. I just happened to start thinking about it. It might, if it was connected to a direct thing, I probably couldn't place what it was. But I think it's, if I'm being honest with myself, related to my father's death. But I'm honestly just more afraid
Okay.
of going
Okay.
to hell myself.
So this was just a random thing that came up for you.
I'm sure there was some cataclysm, but I'm not aware.
No, it's fine. I'm not trying to force you to say anything that you don't think is correct. And if you are honestly just like, I don't know, I just started fearing hell. I think that's fair. You should be honest.
Yeah.
So.
Kind of the fact that I was so suddenly afraid of it actually was kind of like a big motivator for how real it felt to me, in the sense that maybe, my fear is God trying to talk to me, even if I recognize how silly of an argument that is. And so it's I've been reading all this stuff, and I read about the Christian, and I'm really just afraid of a Christian hell and a Muslim hell, because they're the only two really big ones that say we're gonna burn you forever if you don't believe, or at least of the really popular ones, Judaism, Hinduism, most of the others that I've really been able to find anything compelling in don't really, have that belief. And so I was kind of thinking about it like this, and this is kind of my current logic for why I think it makes sense to believe. And so I don't find any particular argument by itself that compelling. So the teleological argument, the cosmological argument, or the Quran being infallible, or the historicity of Jesus Christ, or any particular thing, I don't find compelling.
Yeah, none of them are particularly compelling.
Okay.
So, but my issue with it is, so if I'm wrong about any particular one of those, the consequences are horrible. And most of the objections for Pascal, against Pascal's wager, rest on the idea that there is no reason whatsoever to think that, say, if I hold up a banana and say this banana is God and I should believe in it because if I don't, it's hell, has the same legitimacy to it that, say, Christianity or Islam do. And I don't think that's a totally fair assessment.
Why
is that? Yeah.
Why do you not think that's fair?
Well, so I don't think appealing solely to X amount of people believe in this makes it more legitimate, but
Good.
I think you can at least say it makes it more worth considering. So if there's a billion plus people, 2 billion plus people in one case, a billion plus people in another, who have considered these arguments and they think...
Okay, but you're saying, though, that you did consider it and you looked at the arguments and they are not compelling to you. So at that point, aren't we back to the banana?
No, because because I'm saying I could be wrong about them, because I know that I've held beliefs that I felt very
right.
very
But the best you can do is assess it to the best of your ability and honestly, look at it, at which you did, and your assessment was, I'm not convinced by this. I mean, isn't that true? Isn't that what you just said?
Yes, I mean, in the fact, but again, if the consequences are just so devastating, I mean, this is something I've just been, I mean, I just I haven't been in a normal state of mind for months on end. So just forgive me if I sound kind of nuts.
It's totally fine. And I hope I don't sound like I'm hammering you. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand.
Yeah, so it's not rational, but the fear comes from a place that's deeper than that, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I want to can I just for a moment ask, do you understand from a brain perspective how emotions and feelings work? How you have feelings and the purpose that they serve?
I would probably not in the way that you're saying.
Okay, well let's just walk through this then real quickly. So if you're in a situation, I like to use this scenario where you're going home late at night, you've been out, having fun, and you're downtown and you have to get to your car and you take a shortcut through a dark alleyway. And as you're walking through the dark alleyway, you see something crouched behind a dumpster that's moving. And you're kind of having to go past that in order to get to the end of the alley to get to your car. So your heart starts pounding. You start feeling a little bit of adrenaline. You're starting to wonder if you should turn around and maybe go back the long way, if this was a good idea to cut through this alley. You're starting to experience fear. So as you're walking along and you're telling yourself, I don't really know what that is, but that it's big enough to be a person. It looks like someone crouching, it's moving around. And as you finally get up to it, you realize it's just a garbage bag and it's sort of fluttering in the wind on top a little bit, and it's not a person at all. It's just a trash bag next to the dumpster. And so then you feel this immediate relief, right? So
yeah.
Emotions, what happens is you experience a situation and your conscious brain sort of takes all these inputs and you puts it into the brain, and then the non-conscious part of your brain sort of filters this through and then responds with a feeling and says, this is how you should feel about this. You should feel alert and afraid because there is potentially danger here. We're assessing that this is dangerous, and we're sending this back to your conscious brain to say, you, Teddy, need to be aware here and afraid. And then when you see that when you consciously bring those inputs in and it's just a trash bag, you get the feedback from your brain that says, cool, we can just relax and you can calm down now and go get to your car and let's just get home. And next time, maybe we won't take the alleyway. So your emotions don't tell you anything about reality. They are just reactions to reality that you experience based on your perception of what reality is. If your perception of reality is incorrect, your emotional feedback is going to correspond to that incorrect perception. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I completely understand where you're coming from in the sense that fears don't correspond to necessarily things that are purely rational. I mean, in fact, the opposite of that. I totally agree, but my main problem is I can't have that. I can never really have that total knowledge that it is a garbage bag, and I can't get to that, total relief. And I've really been trying to, and I've been reading all the arguments against it. And I always think if I can just find something, but it's an unfalsifiable belief. And I understand because of that, it's probably not worth believing in, but it's just the consequences are so fucking scary. I'm not afraid of, I don't care about going to heaven. I'm not comfortable with the idea of non-existence, but I'm not afraid of it. Hell scares me, like a literal or metaphysical hell, but just that's like eternal.
Well, here's a question for you though. I mean, I would assume, and maybe I'm wrong in this assumption, but does it seem reasonable to you that something that would create that and put people into fear like that? I mean, would you say that the creation of hell would represent a benevolent God?
So no, I wouldn't. But the thing is, and this is the argument that I always get when I'm say that to theists as well. We can't understand that from our flawed human perspective. And if there is a God and He is truly divine, then no amount of I personally think the morality found in most aspects of Christianity and Islam, from my perspective, is repugnant.
Who else's perspective could you use, though, to assess this stuff? What other perceptions? What other perspective do you have access to use? Aren't you responsible for evaluating this?
I am responsible for evaluating this, but I'm saying if it's completely within the bounds of possibility that my perspective is just totally out of whack. And it's
completely within the bounds of reality that it's reasonable that any of us could be wrong about something. But to say that I'm just going to then say, well, there could be a reason I'm not aware of why it's a good thing to torture people forever, is kind of punting, right? You're punting the moral question. You're saying that to me, when I assess this is really repugnant. But because I could be wrong, I'm just going to punt this and not deal with it. And because I'm driven in this instance by fear, I'm going to go with there is a good reason for this, even if I don't understand it. And that's actually a really dangerous perspective. It's the same perspective as somebody who says, well, the dictator knows best. He's got all the information and I'm just the operative. You, at some point, have to take responsibility, personal responsibility, for making moral judgments about what you believe is right or wrong.
No, that's actually a very solid point in that. Can I just ask, in terms of, do you have any just personal advice for just getting over the fear of hell? Because it's something that personally I've spoken to so many.
Okay,
like,
this is the best
it.
I have to offer, and it's what helped me. I don't know if it will help you, but because you kind of get my logic, maybe it will. When I was younger and I left the church, I pretty much had left because I did not find the concept of the Bible tenable. Like, once I realized how the Bible was put together, that was pretty much the end of Christianity for me. I still believed in God, but I rejected Christianity, and that meant to me that hell no longer was tenable. But what I did think to myself was, if, like in that letter that we just read, I don't know if you heard it or not, but there was a guy, the guy said at the end, something about having to stand before God and give an accounting for your life, right? All I can do, if I am ever called before the Lord to give an accounting for my life, the best I can do is explain to the Lord that when I looked at the concept of hell, it was completely repugnant based on all of the information that I had. And that if there was information that I didn't have, it would be completely unfair to try to hold me accountable for making a decision without that information. And so I could only make a plea to the fairest God that would exist and the most, compassionate God that would exist, that I did my level best to look at this. And when I came to this conclusion that the arguments weren't compelling, the idea of hell was, completely against the concept of a moral and loving God. And so at the end of the day, I had to reject these notions because of the reason that I had and the information that I had available. And to the best of my ability, I sought the truth, and I would rest my case and feel good about it. And at the end of the day, if that lands me in hell, then so be it. Right? I mean, what else could I do? That's the best a human being can do.
Yeah, I kind of get what you're saying, but my brain, and I recognize it's an irrational thought, and I think it's just something I need to work through, but it just keeps jumping. What if my concept of fair is wrong, and I recognize that that's...
But you can only do the best that you can do. That's it. And then at the end of the day, it's just like with a job. You may fail at something that your manager wants you to do, but at the end of the day, you have to just be able to explain what you did and why you did it. If you can offer your manager a really good explanation for the actions you took, that should be sufficient. If you're going to get hammered because you didn't get a memo that had key information that would have changed your actions, that's completely outside of anything you could control. And if you got fired for it, then I would just have to say, hey, I did the best I could do as far as my job with the information and the tools I was given, and they fired me anyway because of information I didn't have, which makes no sense to me, but that's their call.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I'm sorry if I'm not just like, I agree with what you're saying.
I mean, I wish I could wave a magic wand and make fear go away.
Yeah. No, I know. It's just, I recognize that it's almost entirely, if not entirely, an emotional thing. It's just like...
Well, the other thing is, if it's really bothering you, like if this is really disrupting things for you, maybe go talk to someone. Like maybe just go in and talk to a counselor and say, look, I just got slammed with this weird existential fear of hell. Like in the last 6 months, I don't know where it came from, but I really need to get past this. It's bothering me.
I started seeing a psychologist. I'm currently attending college, and I went to go see a college counselor for this.
Good.
And they recommended me to go. No, it's not good, because they recommended me to go to see a psychologist, and I go see that psychologist, and they told me they were religious.
Oh.
There's a secular therapy project, and you might try them and just see if there's somebody in your area. And let's see, you're up in Gainesville. I don't know, but that's a big town. It's a good college town. So maybe check with the Secular Therapy Project online and see if they can make any kind of recommendations for people up in Gainesville that could help you out.
Okay. I've taken enough of your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Well, I wanted to just add a couple things, because I think your case is really interesting, because most people who have kind of this emotional fear of hell were brought up with that, and so that was put into their psyche, when they were too young to be rational. What's interesting about you is that this came up later. I don't know if you mentioned whether you were kind of raised with some kind of notion of hell, or from a particular religion, but something.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, we were if anything, I was like, my parents my mom came from the USSR, and my dad, he was raised by two like rabbis who were Holocaust survivors who were extremely, extremely religious, and he totally rebelled from it because of that. So they were, I'm not anti-theist, but they had like very negative opinions about it. And I think my dad would kind of like laugh at me a little bit if he saw me this freaked out about it. But
it probably doesn't feel funny to you right now, though.
Yeah.
So,
No.
And give yourself some time. It sounds like the rational part of your brain has kind of realized that Pascal's wager is not a good wager, because there's not just the Christian hell, the Muslim hell, or nothing.
And there's like a million Christian religions.
And there's basically an infinite number of possibilities. So
3 different Bibles.
Placing your bet on any one is not a good wager. And
well, I mean, the majority of Christians will say, well, if you believe in Jesus in just some fashion, I think most denominations would.
Here's a thought.
Is that true?
Here's a thought. A lot of denominations think they're the only denomination that's going to be in heaven. But here's a thought. You might want to go look up the denominations that don't believe in a literal hell, and take a look at their.
I've done that. Yeah, I've read all about like the Universalists and the Annihilationists. And
Jehovah's Witness.
That brought me a lot of that made me feel a lot better.
They actually have some very good arguments for a non-literal, situation where there's not an actual hell.
Yeah. At this point, though, it's not just like any argument. Honestly, it's just it is an emotional thing, and I realize that the more I talk about it, I have to approach it from that perspective. Again, I'm really sorry for taking up so much time. I really do.
That's why we're here.
Oh, no worries.
All right. Well, thanks, Teddy.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Have a great day.
You too.
You too.
Bye.
Okay. Well, that was a good one. Hopefully, Teddy gets the support that he needs.
Yeah.
So now let's go to. We're with Kevin in Palo Alto, California. Is that right?
That's right.
Hi, Kevin. You're on with Tracie and John. We're good. How are you?
Doing well. So I just wanted to ask you some questions.
You're going to lay some miracles on us, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've always wanted to get the opposite perspective.
Uh-oh, you're cutting out. Kevin?
Did we lose you?
Hey, Kevin. Can you hear us? Oh, hey, there you are. You cut out for like a few seconds there.
That's weird. Okay.
Okay, you're breaking up, Kevin. You started strong, and now there's like this kind of cutting in and out.
It's static?
Okay, now I hear you.
How about
No, it's like you're cutting out literally in mid-word. Like you're there and then you're not. I don't know what's going on. The last call was solid, so I assume our phones are working. Oh,
Okay.
Come on. Oh, no, I hear him. Okay, let's try one more time.
Okay. So my question was essentially with respect to discussions about miracles. And I would argue that the position that many skeptics hold, and I believe I've heard you, certainly Matt Dillahunty, on this show, would make the claim that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Mm-hmm. And as such, if there's any possible natural explanation, then this must be more probable than a supernatural explanation. And my concern...
I'm not sure that I would add that last part. I'm good with the first part, and I've definitely heard that. But the issue with supernatural explanations, I would have further problems with. But please go on.
Okay. Yeah, I guess this was with respect to David Hume, who I know has been cited And the concern I had with that argument is it seems like it essentially presupposes against any possibility of a supernatural cause at all. So an example I'd give is if today.
Well, here's the thing, though. Before you give an example, I'll agree with you. I mean, you don't even have to convince me of this. I think that you're correct. Here's how I kind of view that. Do we agree that nature exists?
Yes.
So things that exist can be the cause of other things, right?
Yes.
And we would probably agree, and I'm not saying that supernature doesn't exist, but we would probably agree that things that do not exist cannot be the cause of other things, right?
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay. And so currently, we don't really know or have a way to measure or examine supernature to confirm its existence, right? Correct?
Not in a scientific manner.
Well, and we're talking, though, about claims and evidence, which I think claims and evidence would be, you'd have to be able to have some sort of metric for what it is you're looking at as evidence, wouldn't you?
Yes, but
Okay.
Some way to observe.
I think that supernatural evidence isn't necessarily going to be the kind of thing that's going to be testable and repeatable. But what we do have is historical evidence in terms of eyewitnesses to these accounts. So I think I would agree that if you're talking about evidence in a strictly scientific sense, then yes, we wouldn't be able to show things that would demonstrate to a high probability the existence of a supernatural realm. On the other hand, I think if you look at a lot of eyewitness testimony, and Dr. Mike Licona did a really good job of this in his debate with Matt Dillahunty, is that I think there are a lot of good, solid eyewitness accounts, and I think that is evidence in and of itself of a supernatural realm.
You think there are a lot of eyewitness accounts of what?
Of miracles of different sorts. So in the debate with Matt Dillahunty, he was talking about eyewitness accounts, both of miraculous healings and then also near-death experiences in which somebody in an out-of-body experience had heard information about a loved one or knew something about them that that person had never told them. They would have had no way of knowing otherwise.
How do we know they would have no way of knowing?
Well, I suppose we couldn't demonstrate it for sure, but the point is that what Dr. Licona had basically pointed out where we have these medical cases, I believe he had 300, maybe it was just 30, but they had done interviews of the people who were, affected, the person who had the near-death.
Okay, let me just say that the type of evidence you're describing is extremely inferior. All right, so for example, like you said, this is something that we can't really check. If I like this person, for example, that sent the letter earlier, I don't know if you heard or not, but John was reading a letter and he said somebody sent it to my wife's address. I'm pretty sure John didn't give out his wife's address to a fan to send a letter to her to the show, but somehow this person got it. Now, if information exists and is known to anyone, it could be known to others. We know this. So the fact that there is information, if anybody knows, then it could then leak to anyone else. So the idea that someone has information about someone that they are saying, well, I don't know how they would have known this, or it doesn't seem that there's a way, you really can't know what somebody could know. There are no controls on this type of evidence. And that's what makes it inferior.
Okay, but I would agree with that. I mean, and that's why this is something that we're having a discussion about. Whereas if we're talking about, whether the earth was round, there really wouldn't be one. And so I concede that it's not going to be as strong, but I think what we have to do is we have to say that there's two different models of reality. One is a naturalistic model and one is a theistic model. And then we have these observations. Then we would say which model of reality best accounts for this data.
But the theistic model doesn't account for it at all. I mean, when someone says this person knows this information and we don't know how, and you say that's a miracle, that doesn't account for it. Like, how does that account for it? In what way did you explain how they knew the information?
The theistic model would postulate that we as humans aren't just material that we would also have a spirit or a soul, and that there's other dimensions that we can't simply observe. And this would provide the ability for people to have this kind of information, because there's no known natural mechanism by which this could happen.
Okay, this is good. This is good. So then the next question is, how do we test for this?
Okay, so this is where theology starts to come into play. As I think you know, in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, I believe it says, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Now, I think the thing is that I think what God has done, and I think Descartes wrote about this, is that God gives us the evidence so that if it would be sufficient that if we choose to put our faith and trust in him, that we'd have enough reason to believe, but he's not going to
Okay,
go out of his way.
this is an excuse for very weak evidence, basically. I mean, basically what you're saying is that there's not compelling evidence, and you just have to make a choice to accept that this is there, even though we can't test for it, we can't put controls on it, we can't demonstrate it. And that's
the whole reason that's
why
in there.
that's why naturalism gets the big weight on the scales of what's a cause.
Okay, well, the thing is that I think it boils down to personal experience, in the sense that
more bad evidence, right? Personal experience is not good.
To those people, it certainly was very real. And my point was that a lot of these experiences would be extremely unlikely to happen under naturalism, and that's why.
Extremely unlikely, though, it still means the thing can occur.
Well, and I'm not convinced it's extremely unlikely either.
I'm not even either.
It depends on the specifics.
Someone knowing information that I don't know how they got is not a miracle, and somebody having less pain than they had yesterday is not a miracle. I mean,
okay, well, there are accounts of considerably more dramatic healings, but I guess what I wanted to go to was how this relates to the New Testament. And I think if we take a Bayesian approach to it, saying that if we set a prior probability, say of naturalism versus theism, I would argue that the events surrounding the New Testament, specifically things like the conversion of Paul, the eyewitness accounts to the resurrection, the empty tomb, these things that scholars largely agree upon.
What eyewitness accounts to the resurrection?
Accounts that people believe they saw the risen Jesus. That's what there would be.
Well, I mean, a lot of people believe a lot of things. I mean,
alien abductions.
But you're talking about an eyewitness account. So what eyewitness accounts do we have to the resurrection?
Well, I mean, my point is that we have reports of eyewitness accounts.
We do? Okay, so we have people saying that people saw a resurrection.
Well, we also have, so the four Gospels.
That's not an eyewitness account, by the way. When you say that someone says that people said that they saw this, that's not an eyewitness account.
Right, so I mean, you have Mark, which was written by a companion of Peter.
Who did not see the resurrection.
Well, Peter and the disciples said that they had seen the risen Jesus, or that's what they claimed they had seen. My point was that I agree that it would be stronger evidence if all the disciples had written it directly 1 year after the resurrection. Nonetheless, I would contend that it's still going to weigh heavily.
There are very few people who would, I mean, I would have to even go and look at the verses. I mean, when you talk about Bayesian, right? Richard Carrier did a whole thing on Bayesian theory saying that from a Bayesian perspective, Jesus didn't exist. That if you use the percentages, I'm not that into Bayesian, but I'm just saying if you are, there's a guy saying Bayesian, if you use the Bayesian method, it says that it's more likely Jesus didn't ever even actually exist.
Okay. That's true, but his beliefs are very much on the fringe of the historical.
Regardless, most historians aren't using Bayesian theory to come up with their analysis. I'm just saying if you want to use Bayesian, there's a guy that did it, and he put forward his thesis on Jesus doesn't exist if you use Bayesian. But most historians aren't using it.
I know, but my point is that there's a guy named Dr. Aaron Wall And he has an article where he uses it. And the difference is that Richard Carrier applies the Bayesian reasoning to whether or not he accepts the historical documents at all. What Aaron Wall does is a little different. What he does is he says, okay, this is what the historical consensus is. And he says, he actually takes the liberal view, saying, I'm going to assume the liberal view is true, that half of the letters attributed to Paul weren't written by him, that the Gospels weren't actually necessarily written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, just taking them as first century accounts.
Yeah, I don't think any serious historian would believe that those Gospels were written, penned by the people they're attributed to. I mean, even the translators themselves put a preface in before the books to say that, the authorship is unknown, right?
Wait, the authorship, not in the Gospels themselves, it doesn't say the authorship.
No, I'm saying the translators, right? When you open up a Bible that has translation notes, they note that the authors are unknown. That it's tradition, right? It's church tradition that these were the people who wrote them.
That's true, but I'd argue that a lot of them do come up. But I guess the point is that the whole point is that Dr. Wall's analysis was based on the assumption that, okay, we're going to concede the authors, saying that, we don't know who authored Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, just treating them as historical documents from the first century. And his argument was that if we do this, if we just take what the, basically what a moderate historian would say, that from this, we'd infer in high likelihood that it's more likely than not that theism.
So what we're going to get to at the end here is that different people using the same method came to different conclusions. And what I'm trying to get to is to say that a thing that you can examine and observe as a cause that exists and is confirmed to exist is always going to be the default, as opposed to the thing that is not yet demonstrated to exist. You have to actually have a cause that exists for it to be, you have to have a thing that exists for it to be reasonably put forward as a cause. If we can't even get to a point where we can establish the supernatural exists independently, like we can for nature, we're at a quandary. We have to first, if you're going to use the supernatural as the explanation, you have to first demonstrate the supernatural exists. You can't go into this circle where, well, I can't figure out a natural cause for this, or I think a natural cause is highly unlikely, therefore supernature. No, supernature actually has to be demonstrated. It has to be observable and testable and verifiable. Otherwise, we can't say it exists. Otherwise, you're saying, I can't explain this, therefore supernature.
Yeah, that's just an argument from ignorance.
When you say that supernature has to be observable, testable, and verifiable. So if you were to acknowledge that it was possible that there was a God who existed, who wanted people to have faith, so an example would be in the end of the Gospel of John, where Jesus says to the Thomas, or is reported saying that, blessed are those, you have seen me. He said, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. So if there is a God who has a very strong interest in people having faith in him, by not necessarily having direct observation, if that God does exist, how would your methodology be?
I would say that there would be no cause to believe in such a God. He would have set up, or that God would have set up a system where he has provided no cause to believe in it.
Yeah, there's no reason to believe in something that you have no
You're
good
basically
reason
saying,
for believing.
what if there was a thing that didn't want to demonstrate itself but wanted to be believed in? How would you find a way to believe in it? And I'm like, I don't feel compelled to find a way to believe in something that doesn't manifest. But what you're saying is it's the same as something that doesn't exist. So how do you prove it exists without being able to show its existence? That is incoherent.
That is
it's indistinguishable from non-existence.
But the thing is that this is a very different type of belief. So if you're talking, this is about something that a lot of, the vast majority of people who live on Earth do believe there's a God. That's not saying that it isn't true, but I'm just saying this is some.
That's not a good reason to believe in something either.
No, I mean, you know that, right?
Yeah, no, I
get
that in and of itself, but I'm just saying it's a different kind of claim, because we can't just state that this is analogous to the tooth fairy, because there are a lot of people who claim to have seen miracles directly, and specifically in the New Testament, there are a lot of people who
yeah, and there are people who claim to get visions from other types of gods, and there are people who claim to have seen aliens and been abducted by them and had experiences with them and surgeries done on them. And I mean, there's people who make all kinds of claims. But the claim itself has to stand, right? If you can't demonstrate it, it's a useless claim. If you can't demonstrate it, you can't make it be as viable a cause as a thing you can demonstrate. It's not a bias. It's that one thing exists and the other thing we can't demonstrate it exists, and so how can we possibly utilize it as any sort of a cause? All we can do is, using that as a cause is the same as saying X did it. It helps us not at all.
Okay, I guess the concern I'd have with that approach is it essentially says that it would essentially dismiss Christianity out of hand in
it would dismiss any claim that says I don't need to demonstrate it. I can't demonstrate it. I don't need to. You just need to accept it. Yeah, I will dismiss that. Absolutely. I have no problem dismissing that.
There isn't nothing. There is something, but it does require you to
believe it before it's actually demonstrated, and that's not acceptable.
But you would agree that it's not the New Testament isn't no evidence. You would agree that it's
no. Here's the question. Okay, here's the thing. Some people would say there's crappy evidence and good evidence, and some people would say crappy evidence is not evidence. Depending on how you classify things that aren't compelling as either bad evidence or not evidence, you can label it however you want, but it's not compelling and it's really not useful.
Because there's a lot of old books that say stuff, so you have to have some way of weighing.
A claim is not the evidence, right? The claim needs to be supportable. If I go into court and I start, and I'm giving testimony, you could say, well, that testimony is evidence. Well, what if I start giving testimony that my child was flying around the room and the cat was speaking Spanish? And I mean, at a certain point, even though I'm giving testimony, people are going to say that testimony is useless.
And if it's just one person, I would agree with that.
Even if it was three, I would still be thinking, I don't think the kid was flying around the room and the cat was speaking Spanish. I don't know what these people were taking.
What about 500?
I would still have to say cats don't speak Spanish. I would have to see this. I would really have to get this demonstrated, because this defies what we know about reality. And that's the problem here. When you're talking about a thing that we already have established that a cat doesn't have the vocalization skills to speak Spanish, right? And somebody is saying, or even a bunch of somebodies are saying that a cat spoke Spanish, this is aliens abducted me, right? There's tons of people saying aliens abducted them. I do not accept that because it has not been demonstrated. Regardless of the number of people claiming it, it still requires a demonstration at some point, right? Before it to be considered valid and helpful. If we can't examine it and all we have are these people telling the stories, how is this useful until we can actually get into this thing and take a look at it and see what's going on?
Okay, well, the reason I mentioned 500 is that 1 Corinthians was written about 20 years after Jesus' crucifixion. And Paul writes that Jesus had appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters.
How do you know that's true?
Yeah, it's somebody saying it.
My point is, I'm not saying that we could know this for sure, but I'm saying that this is something that would indicate that it is substantial evidence. The thing that I would...
Anyone can claim 500 people saw something. Anyone can claim that. That doesn't mean if you're going to sit there and take their word that 500 people saw somebody, saw some miracle because they're saying it.
But it's not just that. Paul had a very prominent influence within the early church. He was, an enemy of Christianity, and then he had converted. You'd have to look and say, does this person have good reason to lie? I think I agree this possible.
No, does this person have good reason to be mistaken? That's all it takes. He doesn't have to be a horrible liar. He can just be somebody wrong.
So are you saying he's wrong when he talked to the 500 people?
I'm saying I don't know that he did talk to 500 people. You're saying a claim is evidence. And I'm saying there has to be support for the claim. Anybody can go around claiming anything. It's saying 500 people saw this because there's an old book that a guy wrote that he said 500 people saw this isn't evidence that 500 people saw it. Do you understand that?
I agree that it wouldn't. I think it's some evidence, certainly.
It's a claim. Evidence is what supports the claim. All you have is a claim.
I suppose if you were just taking, looking at that at 1 Corinthians in isolation, that would be true. But we also see it corroborated by.
We have more claims, right? I mean, this is what it's boiling down to. Okay, wait, we have other callers, and I just want to say where this is going and where this is at, it just seems like what we're rolling around in and going back and forth with is there's not going to be a demonstration. There's these claims, and you take them or you don't take them. There are these things that some people say, I just don't accept could happen naturally, and therefore I'm going to say that instead of saying I don't know what happened, I'm going to plug in this concept of supernature, which tells us nothing really more about what actually occurred. And in the end, you're right, it's a difference in perception. I consider this to be really useless information, and you seem to consider it useful. I appreciate the call, and maybe we can continue that conversation at a later date. I do want to get to some other calls, though. Is that okay? I don't want to.
That's fine. It was a good conversation.
Okay. I feel like we did allow each other to talk a bit about this, and that I'm okay with that. But we could probably go on till the end of the show, and I really don't want to do that because of the other calls. But I hope you feel that you were at least allowed to express.
Absolutely. No, I think you're very polite, and I definitely appreciate the conversation. I think it does show there's just a difference in worldviews in terms of how we look at evidence and what would constitute.
I would agree. There's a difference there. I agree. I think
it's up to the viewers, and I'd encourage them to look at a fellow named Craig Keener, who has a book about miracles where he has basically interviewed people.
And feel free also if you want to go and post to the blog. Like if you there's a show blog, and we have this show thread already up. So if you want to post things there and talk to people about this further, you're welcome to do so. Okay.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you.
Now that isn't to say that you can't design a good experiment to try to demonstrate the supernatural, because like out-of-body experiences, and this has actually been done where somebody's in the hospital and they put. They write a random thing on a piece of paper and put it up on the bookshelf up high to test whether if the person feels like they left their body and floated up, can they read what's on this note? And, there's ways of, you have to have a good controlled experiment.
Right, but the problem is, though, this makes assumptions about the nature of supernature. And that's the whole thing. We know nothing about what this thing would even be.
Yeah.
And so when he was describing NDEs, and he was saying, well, these people came back and they knew things about these loved ones and blah, and it's like, this is a one-off. There's no way to control for this. There's no way to, confirm this. There's no way to know what someone knew, what weird thing you might have heard 20 years ago.
Yeah, this would be an attempt to control for that. Can they actually see something physically in the room, not knew something about somebody that's mysterious?
But what if supernature works in a way that you then have knowledge, but you don't have vision?
Yeah. Then it's special pleading.
We don't have a model of supernature. Yeah. It's a big, huge, we know nothing about it.
And even if they could, 100 people could reliably read the note, that doesn't mean it's supernatural. It means we might not have an explanation yet.
Okay.
But
now this one, you need to jump in. You're making me do all the talking here by not.
I'm not making you do anything.
You need to talk, and I told you that at the beginning of the show. So number 5, we're looking at Joe in Bastrop, Texas. Hi, Joe. You're on with Tracie and John.
Can you hear me good?
We can hear you fine.
How you doing?
Oh, okay. I'm doing all right. So I had something to say about the kind of the, I guess it's called the God of the Gaps idea.
Yes.
So, okay, so somebody sent me a movie on my smartphone, and it was the kind of the famous African-American astronomer, Neil
deGrasse Tyson?
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And So what he was saying was, he said, well, you got this one idea of God, which is, there's these things that we haven't explained yet, and that maybe God can be in there, somewhere in there because we haven't explained it. So maybe God's the explanation. But then he says, scientific information is growing, and so if that's your God, then that
the God gets smaller, right?
Getting smaller, right? Well, I don't think that. I think that's kind of might be a little misleading as far as what's happening with science. I got a little time. I actually I do security for a television show actually that's kind of on a hiatus right now, and actually even when I'm working, I have a lot of free time. So I did for a couple of months here. I did these kind of just Google internet searches on a bunch of this stuff, and because some of it I kind of remembered about it, but I had to look into some more stuff, and it seems like on some of these things that it's the opposite, and that what's really been going on is the gaps have been getting bigger, really.
So what you're saying is sometimes the more you learn, the more you learn you don't know.
Or even in terms of science, right. It's kind of like in science, about 100 years ago, they thought they were kind of, closing in on, there wasn't going to be much more to learn. And then, all of a sudden it was 100 times more. So it's almost like the gap is right now they're saying what's the universe.
Can I just ask you, because it says, Joe, here that you're a theist, so I assume your friend is kind of arguing from an atheist position. And what I'm wondering is, do you think that it's really valid to say that if you don't know how something happens, that God did it?
Well, no, not necessarily. No, I wasn't going there.
So what is? I understand what you're saying. You're kind of saying like, oh, there's always going to be things we don't know, and there might be lots of.
Well,
stuff
now they're saying like with the dark matter and the dark energy. Now they're saying that what we know about and describe in terms of matter describes less than 5% of the universe.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
There's a big gap. We'll agree there's a big gap. Okay. So where do we go with that?
Well, that's all. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion.
Well, is that all? Did we you just want to agree that there's a lot of things we don't know?
Well, just that I think that, that it's misleading to say that the gap is shrinking. It may be growing.
Well, but wait a minute. No, here's the thing. Every time we learn one more thing, we may learn that we know that there's a lot more stuff that we don't know, but there was still just that amount of stuff we didn't know, right? So let's say that we have the pie. Can you picture a pie chart? So you got a pie chart, and you learn like just 1% of what's in this huge pie chart. And then tomorrow you learn something else, and you were only aware of like 40% of the pie chart. And now you're aware of 70% of it, right? And you're like, wow, there's this even bit more stuff we don't know. You still don't know the same amount of stuff, right? It's just but you did learn a little bit more. So the amount of stuff you didn't know actually did get smaller, even though you became aware of more things you didn't know. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying, but let me put it to you another way. Okay, let's say that you've got it, that it's both growing. At one point, it looks like it's growing, and then, at one point, it looks like the gap is shrinking, and then all of a sudden, it grows bigger. So, they say that's like something like the uncertainty principle, where now they're saying
but the gap still
they're
shrank.
drawing a line saying you can never know this ever.
What she's saying though is that the amount of stuff you don't know, whether you're aware of it or not, you still don't know the same amount of stuff. And if you learn something, you still know more than you did yesterday.
Right. Well, you can, but I think it's a little, if we're discovering new species of animals. So, there's, we discovered, the 1,000th species of rat, living in Indonesia or whatever. That's not really, that doesn't speak to the issue of, that's not closing. In other words, if you're talking about things that we don't understand how they work, or in other words, what constitutes the galaxy in terms of matter, then you're going from saying we think we understand what 99% of the universe is. So there's this famous story about the scientist giving the tour of the museum, about 100 years ago, and he says, is all we need to do now is, we're going to learn some more. We're going to change some where the decimal goes, and we're going to just that's really all is left to do is kind of get things a little more specific mathematically, and then right after that comes quantum mechanics, and then next thing you know, you have dark matter and dark energy, and it's getting what we don't know goes from 1% to 95%.
But you didn't know the other 95% before that either.
If there's let's say there's 100 things. Wait. Let's say there's 100 things. I'm going to try this one more time. No, this is it. This is the last time.
No. I know. I hear you totally, but I'm making a more subtle point. I'm saying that okay. So you learn, even if you just learn one fact, then that's one more thing. But what I'm saying is, in terms of this discussion about issues of God and whatnot, that we're going from seeing maybe a very small area in which a God could be active to further down the line now saying, oh, well, it's 100 times bigger than we thought it was.
All right.
That's all.
I'm going to say that at this point, this is like a completely irrelevant tangent because you and your friend already agree that the God of the gaps is a really bad God idea. So arguing about the size of the gap, this is like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Does it matter? I mean, what difference does it make how big the gap is?
Well, Stephen Hawking talks about it. He talks about how...
No, I'm not saying that in no context does it matter. I'm saying that in the context of arguing about the God of the gaps, if you have two people in the argument and both of them say the God of the gaps is a really bad model for a God, then getting into an argument about the size of the gap is a little bit irrelevant. What difference does the size of the gap make?
No, excuse. Right. No, I'm saying I don't think that it depends on which direction you're coming from. I think that if there's a God, that God may be operating within those gaps. To say that the gaps themselves are the only rationale for saying they're a God, that alone, I don't think that's a very good argument for God.
Right, and neither does your friend. And so you both are in agreement that whether there's a God in there or not, it's irrelevant because it would be a really crappy argument for a God. So the size of the gap is irrelevant.
But there's the secondary issue of whatever your argument is for a God, if there is one, then for him to be able to, or it to be able to do anything, there would have to be gaps, and it sounds like there's plenty of them.
It's still a bad argument though, because taking
it's a
something.
Bad argument for saying yes. It's a bad argument for saying that there is a God, but
it's also useless from the standpoint of, like, for example, the Catholic Church now accepts like evolution and some other ideas about science that they previously were not accepting, and so basically they're saying yes, evolution is correct, and God had a hand in it, and so they just simply say thank you, God, for allowing us to evolve. So even when you can,
it's not a gap.
Yeah, even when you can explain it, you can still say, and therefore God. So to me, if you just want us to say there's really big gaps, I'm totally on board right now, and we can end the call and move along because I agree there's big gaps.
And there always will be.
Well, yeah. So there would be that wouldn't be my reason for saying that there's a God, just because there's gaps at all.
I believe you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a very good. I don't think that's a very good rationalization.
Well, are we good?
There could be other ones.
Are we good?
Well, but I do think there is a God.
I don't think that did you want to talk about that too, or?
Sure. I mean, we could go there. I mean, I thought the gap thing would be more interesting, but I guess kind of not much of an argument there.
We kind of all agree on it anyway.
No, if you want to talk about what is like your best reason for believing in a God?
Well, I think that if you look at what they're saying about consciousness, I listened to a conversation the other day between Sam Harris and David Chalmers.
Okay.
And I think that this idea of consciousness being if it's irreducible, because evidently showing how consciousness or subjective experience can be reduced to material explanation is kind of given people some trouble at this point.
Chalmers would argue that, yes.
Yeah, well, Sam Harris was saying the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Sam Harris said you might as well have an explanation for how, a genie comes out of a bottle. He said that there's just, there's no way to compel somebody to think that a physical mechanism is going to give rise to subjective experience, and he's a neuroscientist.
And yet, if you damage the brain, consciousness gets messed up, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely, yeah. It seems
Why?
to be heavily involved in it. No,
Yeah, it would seem to be
Because
heavily
they're
involved in
related.
it, right?
well, I mean, if you damage your television set, you can't get the signal, but it doesn't mean that there's no signal there. So
Correct.
it's definitely.
But we have evidence
people
but we have evidence for channel signals.
TV signals.
Right. We don't have evidence that there's
Right.
something going around that is like a signal for consciousness that we're just conduits for. I don't know of
Well,
such
evidence. I'm not saying there's a signal for consciousness. I'm saying I was using that as an analogy.
And I think it's a good analogy, but I'm saying that
That's
if I
correlation. You have correlation.
okay, and if I take that as a correlation, what I'm saying is we do know that the brain is involved in it. We do know that if we damage the brain, it doesn't work anymore, and we don't know of anything else that is, as far as I'm aware, there's nothing else you can alter in reality that's going to change your, like mess up your consciousness, like messing up your brain. So for example, there's all kinds of ways you can mess with the brain to alter your consciousness.
Right.
And I don't know of things that you can do outside of affecting a person directly that, I mean, am I missing something?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm saying that the issue of whether or not consciousness can be understood in a reductive way, whether or not it can be shown to be reducible.
I have issues with the idea of can it or is it, right? I mean, I read a lot of stuff on consciousness from different people in the field, and some of them were a little bit, there's the thing that you're talking about is sometimes called the hard question. And there's the thing called qualia that is also invoked. And there's other researchers who are like, I'm not so on board with qualia, I'm not so on board with hard question. They do see it as sort of, your brain does this, there's your consciousness. Now, I'm not qualified to assess who is correct or who is incorrect. I have difficulty wrapping my brain around the idea of qualia and a hard question. I have a hard time understanding what the problem is, because to me it doesn't seem like a problem. It's like saying, why is water wet? How does the brain, produce a consciousness? To me, it's like, this is something that we see happening. You can, we can observe it, like we can map it, you
can observe your consciousness. You can't observe.
No, I'm saying that we can map people's brains and see things happening at a conscious level and a non-conscious level.
You can't, but you can only experience consciousness subjectively.
I'm not sure that matters.
Well,
I mean, if I paint a rock red, that one rock is red, but does it matter?
It matters that you can observe that the rock is red, and other people can observe that it's red. But with consciousness, the reason why there is a subject of consciousness, the reason why there's a discussion of the hard problem and qualia and all that is because consciousness itself can only be known subjectively. So the way that
Wait a minute, though. I mean, here's the thing, right? Because right now we have, for example, computers. So if I take I can look at pictures or listen to music, and then they can take a computer that can translate my recollection of the picture into a version of the picture.
Pictures.
Okay?
Right, yeah.
Now what happens, this to me would indicate that there could come a point where we could have John connected to Tracie, so that John experiences what Tracie experiences. Now, I don't know that that could ever be possible, but I'm just saying that when we can have a machine that can translate what I've experienced into its own, capacity, why would I reject the notion that my subjective consciousness could not eventually be shared with others?
Well, in other words, he could experience what you're experiencing.
That's what I'm saying, which would mean that it's not just a subjective, like a single subject thing.
No. But he might be able to experience what you're experiencing, but consciousness is not what you're experiencing. It's the very idea that you are experiencing.
And that's the part that I don't get. That's where it breaks down for me, and I say I don't understand why that's hard.
Fine, but I'm saying, okay, so apart from my opinion and your opinion, all I'm saying is that if somebody does find the hard problem compelling, right, which a lot of people do,
right, correct,
everybody from
I agree.
Then then if they find themselves going down the road of some type of belief that consciousness is fundamental and not being derived, that if it is fundamental, then at that point, if you're saying that there's a consciousness that is as a fundamental part of the universe, like energy that exists apart from people and animals, well, I mean, if you start saying that, then immediately people are gonna. I know from discussion.
Right, but would you acknowledge that we're not there yet?
I think that we're definitely not at. It's not proven, but I think that there's people who that's their impression.
Right, but but that would be what would be called like a hypothesis, right? Like somebody has this idea that there's something else going on,
right.
And so the next step is to prove it, right? To go in and do some testing, try to figure out how this thing would work, right? If it's not your brain generating it, if the brain is just a conduit, then we have to figure out, where is it coming from? What would be the model? How would that function? And how can we then go and falsify that theory, correct?
Right. Yeah.
And we have not done that.
No, I mean, I'm
Okay.
not saying, well, I don't think that, there's a lot of things that you make decisions about in life without proof. Right, but wouldn't you agree that that's the worst way to make a decision? Like, isn't it better to make a decision when you have all of the information as opposed to lacking information that's key to that decision? No, you form an impression based on the best information that you have.
Forming an impression is different than making a decision. Wait, forming an impression is different than making a decision. Right?
Okay, well, you form an impression. So, in other words, there's people who, like somebody like Daniel Dennett, believes that consciousness is mechanistic and that it wouldn't matter whether you had, a machine or a computer or neurons that if it was performing the right calculations, the right algorithm, you could get consciousness. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that's his opinion. That's what he believes. I don't know if it was one time when he made the decision. I think he continues to use the information that he has. And if you were to ask his opinion, he'd say, yeah, I believe that I believe in the computational theory of intelligence. Some people, like a David Chalmers, believes that, that it's very likely irreducible.
Wouldn't you agree, though, that a person could put forward different ideas and understand different ideas without committing to belief in any of them?
No, but if you ask them, yeah.
No. What I'm saying is it possible to say, I understand how it might be this way, I understand how it might be that way, I understand how it might be this other way. There's like all these different ideas of how it could be, or it could be something that no one's thought of yet. And isn't it possible to understand all of those concepts and how they are derived and how these people have come to these ideas without actually committing to any of them as a belief?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so my question would be, while it's still being debated and while there is still insufficient information to form an informed opinion by even the experts in the field, wouldn't it be best for a human being to basically say, yeah, we just don't know this yet, it's still being hashed out, and so this is not really evidence for anything yet?
I wouldn't say it would be best. I think it's understandable and reasonable.
Well, you have to have some reason. You have to have some reason to consider it more likely than other explanations.
Absolutely.
And I don't know Chalmers, but what is his reason for saying that it's more likely?
Chalmers is a little wooey, in my opinion. Like, I did the reading and I was ooh, he's a little.
Like speaking for myself, floaty. I have to have a reason to believe something is more likely than another explanation. It's fine to say, well, it could be this and it could be that. Anything could be true, but what's the reason for thinking that it's true?
Well, so this is what I think. If David Chalmers is wooey, I don't really think Sam.
That was my opinion from the limited reading that I did. Is that he seemed a little more out there than some of the other folks writing.
Steven Pinker. You have Steven Pinker. You have Sam Harris. You have David Chalmers. And so, but in answer to the other question, why would you think it? So these people, this is all they do, is they lay out these discussions and they lay out their arguments and.
But it sounds like these are hypotheses, right? It sounds like right now these are.
That they're not hypotheses, but the thing about a hypothesis is you might hear. Let me address something else that I've wanted to say before. Is when you're describing getting the evidence and coming to a conclusion or trying to make a decision, so you said, is it reasonable that somebody would say, I don't have an opinion on this yet. I don't choose to, and that is reasonable. But also at the same time, if you ask somebody honestly, even though they don't feel like it's been proved one way or another, you could ask them, but between me and you, do you actually have a feeling about which one you do think is true?
Sometimes people do, but sometimes people don't.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
and I guess what I'm saying is that there's no point in committing to a belief. Like even on this thing, even though I have great difficulty understanding the idea of qualia, the idea of like the issue that's a problem with subjectiveness of consciousness, I have so much trouble understanding why that's problematic. It doesn't mean that it's not problematic. It means I have trouble understanding why it's not problematic, and so there is a part of my brain that wants to just say, oh, therefore this is ridiculous. But at the same time, I know that I can't do that, right? I'm not qualified to do that. And just because I don't understand a thing doesn't make it automatically ridiculous. It just means I'm not understanding it. So I can't say that I, am committed to an idea of what's...
Tracie's not committed to it. So that's you.
Right, but I guess my point is when we're talking about the idea, this whole discussion was about what makes you believe in a God, right? That's what this is about. And I'm saying that we're into a gap here. And we just finished saying that God of the gaps was a bad argument for gods.
No, I don't think we're in a gap at all.
I think we just demonstrated a gap when we have people who are experts in a field who are, when we have people who are experts in a field who are not agreeing on what's going on and what the answer is, and they all are putting forward hypotheses, all of which, and some of which cannot even be tested, and others which can be tested, but maybe not to the degree that they need to be, we're in a gap. Right?
Yeah. Well, there's a gap in the sense of the research community, but that doesn't mean...
That means there's a gap for the real people. If the research community that is leading the effort to answer these questions... But
Tracie, let me put a dent in that idea, okay? There often arises a situation where you may hear something being debated by a research community, but there may be somebody within that community who feels certain, and let me finish, who feels certain that it's one way or another. That person may be the person who goes on to prove a hypothesis and be correct.
Or they may be the fringe that goes on to be fringe. I mean, but what we don't know.
But nevertheless, sometimes a person finds himself in a position of honestly believing something one way or another.
Sure, but at that point, it's just a hunch.
Right.
And a hunch isn't evidence. Once they do go on and convince the others with real evidence...
But we're still in a gap.
Convincing other people is not what makes something true. It's either true or it isn't.
Well, that's true, but if you want to...
It doesn't matter if you convince everybody there's a God, that doesn't make it true.
You have to demonstrate... You have to demonstrate that what you're saying is true, though, right? In some way.
You have to... No, you don't have to demonstrate to other people that it's true necessarily. That doesn't...
Wait a minute. Hold on. Okay. For the purposes of this show, if a person calls in and says, I have no obligation to demonstrate that what I'm claiming is true, it's a useless call. I mean, anybody could call in, make their claims, and say, I don't need to demonstrate it to anybody else.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying for instance, if I say that they're polluting the river, and I go down there and I see them dumping barrels of waste into the river. But then, they clean up the mess and they cover up what they did, and I'm not able to prove it, I'm not able to demonstrate it, then I can't expect people to believe me. The burden of proof is on me, but I am still going to believe it's true. Okay,
so I'm going to have to move on to some other callers, but I just want to say that at the end of this, I want to say that even asking, what's the best argument for God, I got no closer to understanding how this relates to a God.
If you believe that consciousness is irreducible and is part of the universe, then that's kind of by default is what a God.
How do you get to that?
How do you get from there to God?
If you're in the sense that if you say that there's a consciousness that exists as a fundamental part of the universe before human beings or animals or, even the galaxies formed, you take that around and say that to people.
Wait a minute, we haven't gotten there. We're not there at all. Before the galaxy is formed. I mean,
I jumped
wait a minute.
But
That was a big jump.
But consciousness, even the problem of consciousness doesn't get you there, like by any stretch.
I didn't say it did, but I'm saying people who have some type of panpsychist view of consciousness are littered in the literature.
Okay, but the idea that we're going to talk about the issues of what's going on in consciousness research and that this somehow demonstrates a God, and then to get to that God, we have to go to the outer limits of, before the universe.
I didn't say it's not the outer limit. I mean,
you were talking about before the universe was formed. I would say that's pretty much.
No, I didn't say before the universe was formed. I said before the galaxies were formed. In other words, it's an aspect.
Okay, we're going to have to move on to some other calls. Maybe you could, explain this at the blog, and other people can understand it better than I can. Maybe this is like the hard problem where I have trouble with it.
Or any of those thinkers who write about that.
I like Damasio. Personally, but
he's in there among these people are in there among the usual suspects. Okay. Damasio is one of them, but you'll find panpsychists among all those people.
It still doesn't get me to a God, so I'm going to let this go. Thank you for your call.
It kind of what a lot of people would call a God.
And it's still a hunch.
I'm still not sure
it's still a hunch
that
because
qualifies as even most people's God.
This would be the time to end the call.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks, Joe. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and we'll go with, this is Luke, who I think I've spoken to before. And you're on with Tracie and John.
Hey, Luke.
Hey, Tracie, nice to call in again. And this time you're going to like me because I have a very specific question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I guess you don't have the question.
Oh, you're on, yeah.
If you guys are an atheist, why are you not moral nihilists?
What do you mean by that?
You believe that there is no meaning or purpose.
Why should an atheist be a moral nihilist?
Well, what is there that gives meaning to the universe?
Why do you think there has to be something that gives meaning to the universe?
So we can have conversations about reality or anything else.
So there has to be something to apply a meaning to have a conversation about it?
Is there any meaning in the universe?
I don't think there's any inherent meaning in the universe. Would you disagree?
Yes. I mean, the fact we're having conversation kind of disproves that.
What do you think the meaning of the universe is that allows us to have a conversation?
Well, the thing is, I'm not sure if you guys hold to the same position, but from what I've heard from the Atheist Experience call-ins, everyone, like most atheists, are moral subjectivists. That is to say, they don't believe that morality is objective or apart from them. They believe morality is an expression of their personal preferences. And I say, well, the fact that we're using language to express them illustrates that we're not really subjectivists. We're being objectivists.
I'm not sure that people would agree. I can't speak for Matt, but I think he goes toward the concept of, I can't speak for him, but I'm not sure that he would agree with that subjective morality idea. And I mean, when you talk about morality, specifically, what are your metrics for what constitutes a moral, like a morality?
Well, I mean, are we really talking about, like, do any moral categories even exist?
You're going to test to see if a dog has moral tendencies. What are you looking for?
Well, I'm not interested if a dog has moral tendencies.
I am, because we need to find out what are you calling morality? If we're going to have a discussion about morality, you talk about meaning, we need to know what it means. So if we were going to test to see if dogs have moral tendencies, what would we be looking for?
Morality is not a tendency. Morality is a goal you have to strive for. It's not a natural phenomenon.
So are you saying morality doesn't actually exist in any sort of metric way? There are no metrics for morality. There's no measurements for it. You're saying it can't be measured or identified?
What do you mean? How do you mean you measure it? I'm not sure what
I mean, how would you quantify morality? What are you looking at and looking for when you are trying to determine whether or not morality exists and in what way that it exists?
Well, no, I'm a Christian. I say morality exists and the character of God, it brings that into the universe.
Okay, so if we wanted to say, let's say we want to find out if a dog has morality, what are we looking for?
But if you're atheist, what is morality at that point?
I'm asking you, what would you be looking for? I'm trying to figure out what it is. If you wanted to know if dogs have a morality, what would you be looking for?
What makes somebody a moral agent?
I would see it would only be in as much as it mimics Christianity or Christian activity. But my question is, why are you not moral subjectivist?
I don't know what you mean by moral, so I'm having difficulty answering your question because there's a word in your question that is not been given I don't know that we agree on. So I'm trying to figure out what you mean by moral, right? So if
between right and wrong.
If we wanted to test to see if dogs were capable of morality, what would we be looking for?
What kind of behavior?
No, but my question is directed at you. Are you not moral nihilist?
I can explain it to you, but I need to know what you're calling morality, because what I'm calling morality might be something totally different, in which case the conversation would take a different turn. So
Yeah,
what I'm
we have to agree on what morality
I need
is.
to know what you're asking, okay?
I want to know what morality is to you.
What morality means to me is a set of tendencies that are shared in social species to different degrees. When they are tested for in other species, when we test for moral tendencies in species other than human beings, we are looking for the concepts that they understand as, equality within their species, right? So for a dog, we would want to know, does that dog recognize the concept of fairness between itself and another dog? The concept of empathy between itself and another dog. Can this dog experience guilt? Yeah, all of the feelings that we have that help us relate to one another in ways that allow us to treat one another as a species in ways that serve the social function of our existence. Does that help?
Oh, so morality is what continues the species. The ultimate pinnacle of what determines what right and wrong is how it keeps the species going.
No, that's not what I said. What I said,
So what are you saying?
What I'm saying is that there are particular tendencies that have developed in social species that we share. And there are other species that have different variations of these same things, but they are the tendencies that allow us to be social as opposed to rogue or independent animals that don't necessarily have a high level of sociability. You can breed sociability into an animal. So we had, for example, the silver fox experiment where they took these foxes, they bred them to be more passive, and in essence created a more social version of they created another animal out of it that was more social. And that animal had more of these communicative social tendencies. In order to interact as a society, you have to have the concept of one another as equal, right? So I have to see John as being like me in a way that a dog is not like me, okay? And so morality has to do with all those tendencies that allow me to say, this thing I treat with fairness and compassion and empathy because I recognize this thing is like me. Other species have that same capacity. Whether or not it results in our species ultimately doing what's best for us, I don't know. But I do know that it is something that has evolved in people and in animals, and that when we test for it, we do have metrics that we're looking for, and it is the things that allow us to recognize our own species. Does that help?
But that doesn't really answer the question, because I'm asking. So, whether or not we're bringing other animals into it, morality is devised by seeing how human beings act in nature. Or they're acting for the benefit of society.
It's not. Morality isn't about an action so much as tendencies that exist within social animals. That's what I'm trying to explain. How they manifest is a different question, right? But whether or not a thing is moral, it would be, is it capable of experiencing and expressing things like empathy, equity, compassion, fairness, right? Like a dog, if we can show that this dog has a recognition of fairness between itself and another dog, then we realize that it starts to have these moral tendencies, or what some people have trouble calling that morality because they have issues with the idea of applying morality to another species, because I think they're little specieses. But the point is, this dog has a tendency that is like our tendency for fairness, right? So the dog can exercise fairness as well and recognize fairness as well. A chimpanzee also can recognize fairness, but it recognizes fairness in a different way than the dog, right? So there are these tendencies that exist at different levels and express in different ways in different species, but they do seem to be mainly in the social species.
So
That's morality.
Do you disagree with that?
When people express like fairness, that's not actually an action on their part. It's just an expression of their biology. There's no actual choice involved. There's no agency involved.
The only agencies that would be involved, the idea that you are capable of fairness, to me, makes you a moral agent, right? The idea that especially when you express that, right? So let's say you're hit with a question where somebody says, I want this and this person wants that, and you have to then think about, I have this desire to be fair, so now I have to decide what is fair. But the morality starts with the metrics, with those moral tendencies that already exist, right? You already have that morality as part of your core being as a social species that says, these are the metrics that make me be part of the things that are categorized as morally capable. Now, how I express that morality is going to be determined by my personal judgment. Probably my experiences are going to come into this. I think experience is probably going to play a big role, because you can socialize people to behave in certain ways that seem really reprehensible, and yet the society itself will say, oh, well, we see this as like a good thing for whatever reasons that they're trying to explain it. The point, though, is that a person should at least be trying to exercise fairness, empathy, equity, compassion, guilt, obligation, all of those things that are between people. If you're trying to express that, you're at least trying to be moral. Whether or not other people are going to view what you're doing as moral is another thing, because they're going to have their own experiences and their own judgment of it. But as long as you are exercising those tendencies in your decision, you are acting as a moral agent.
So basically, fairness. Go back to fairness is an attitude or a mood that people have, and they express itself in our nature. But then all of a sudden we have to strive. When we strive for it, it's not necessarily in our nature, right? I mean, if we're striving for it, that means we have to actually live up to it. It's not necessarily in our nature.
I think it is in our nature.
So then why do we have to strive for it?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm understanding, but it's like there's a difference between being capable of fairness and being called on to treat someone fairly. So, for example, if I treat John in a way, if I cheat him out of his money, I know I'm not being fair. I am not acting morally toward John, because I'm not trying to be fair. When I'm trying to be fair, even if I do something and it turns out badly, most people will be compassionate toward that. They will say, it didn't work well and it was a bad idea, but Tracie was trying to do the right thing, right? Most people will understand that I was trying to behave fairly toward John. Now, if it looks like I'm not trying to be fair, if I'm trying to be unfair to John, people will say I'm treating him immorally, that I'm doing something bad or wrong. Does that make sense?
Well, then what makes fairness or right or wrong true? Is it just that we have desire for it to be true?
No, it's not about whether or not fairness is true. It just simply is, right? I mean, fairness is a tendency in social species that have that as a tendency.
So when you're saying it just is, it's not true. It's like there's no.
It's like saying dark hair, right? Some things have dark hair.
Is that true?
It's not. It's not true or untrue. It just is. We have a capacity for fairness. When we exercise the capacity for fairness, it's labeled as acting morally. When we exercise our capacity to not treat someone fairly, we call that immoral. When the thing that we're doing is that has nothing to do with fairness, we say that it's not a moral judgment. It has nothing to do with morality. Does that make sense?
But the thing is, you're kind of jumping around. On the one hand, you're saying that fairness is an expression of our biology, and we ought to, and we naturally go for it. But then all of a sudden, you turn around and say, "Well,
no. Wait, there's a difference between saying I have a capacity for fairness and I am going to be fair."
In all situations, yeah.
Right? So because, for example, chimpanzees also show the capacity to be deceitful. So,
as do humans.
Right. I mean, we can be fair or unfair. When a person behaves in a way that people say you've behaved fairly or you've tried to behave fairly towards someone, you've made a good faith effort to act in fairness, we would say that was that I was behaving morally correctly, because that's what moral is, the expression of fairness. When I don't treat someone fairly, when I actually treat them unfairly, that's what we call immorality. That's all I'm saying. You're asking what makes it better or worse. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm saying we have a capacity to be fair, and when we are, that's what we call morality. When
it's a label we put on it.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's more an expression of what social society pressures on you. It not actually means it's right in and of itself.
I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm saying we label the behavior of being fair to people as right. We've labeled it that. We've created the idea that this is right because this is a tendency that we value and that we strive for, because among social species, it makes biological, like evolutionary sense that we're going to more often treat each other in a preferential way because it helps our survival. And so this isn't something that we consciously need to actually understand, because as I said, even a dog will show this, because the dog needs to be able to work with other dogs in order to survive. And so these tendencies have evolved along with everything else about the dog to feed into its survival. And it's the same for us. We just simply have evolved these tendencies, and when we utilize them, when we try to be fair in general, it helps us as a group when everyone can trust each other. When you can't trust other people in your group breaks down, and it's very bad. Does that make sense?
Now you're saying that survival. But now you're saying that survival is the ultimate moral imperative.
No, I am not saying it's a goal or an imperative. I'm saying it is the reason that these traits have evolved. Whether or not, it's like saying that noses are an imperative. They're not. It's just something that helps us survive.
But you understand there's a difference between a nose and a concept of fairness, right?
That there's a difference between what?
A nose.
Noses and the concept of fairness.
No, there's not.
Wow.
These are evolutionary traits.
Fairness is a moral imperative. It's not. No.
Why are you calling it a moral imperative?
Because you in the conversation you said that it is important for us to continue as a species.
No, I didn't say it's important for us to continue as a species. I did not say it is important for us.
She said it has survival value.
I simply said that things that survive and through an evolutionary process generally, end up with traits that have served them in their survival. Whether or not it's important for people to survive, I'd have no judgment on that.
Well, then why do you bring it up in the conversation as an example?
I don't think I said that it was important for people to survive.
But you're bringing it up as if it's something important.
I don't know why. I'm saying simply that it's relevant to why we have why I have eyes, why I have a sense of fairness, why I have a sense of empathy, why I have, a heart. These are things that evolve. I don't have a choice in these things. This is simply, I was born part of a species that has these innate tendencies in general across a population, different degrees of variation in how they're distributed. But the point is, this is simply innate to most people. And I'm simply explaining to you why. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, or I'm just saying that's how we are. That's how we are built.
Imperative implies that there's some external agent making a decision. Your eyes aren't an imperative. There's something that evolved in us in order to give us a survival advantage.
Right. So how does that relate back to it being like, how is our eye like our moral imperative?
Because they give us a survival advantage.
It wasn't a decision.
Different. That's different than saying that I think it's important that we have a survival advantage. I'm simply saying it's true that it is giving us a survival advantage to be able to work together and trust each other as a social group.
So you think it's important?
I think it's what?
So you think it's very important that we...
It's important if surviving as a group is the goal.
And is it? Is that what we? Is that?
That's up to you.
We have to,
Whether or not you want to participate in this is up to you, right?
That's a preference.
Society will deal with people who cause so much disruption that it threatens the social structure, right? I mean, they're not going to sit there and, in essence, let somebody destroy the group. So usually society has these self-defense mechanisms as well. But I'm just simply saying that moral tendencies exist in many species. They can be tested for. They have been tested for and demonstrated in many species, including people. They seem to serve as an ability to identify other members of your own species and work together with them in this sort of trusting way so that you can cooperate. And it serves the capacity to survive as a product of the fact that we evolved to this point. Whether or not we should continue to evolve and survive, that is kind of up to the group.
okay, this really isn't going anywhere.
I don't know where it's supposed to go. Where is it supposed to go?
You're not engaging with what I'm saying, but thank you anyway. But
Okay.
but on a last note, I just want to say I don't really believe you guys are atheists because you are trying to implicitly say there's something of value. But well, thanks anyway.
I didn't even catch that. All right, well, thank you.
How could that not mean we're atheists?
I don't know.
If
I don't
you-
know what,
if
I don't
you-
know. I have the same, this was,
If you value survival, you're not an atheist? How does that follow?
I don't know, because when I was a theist, I didn't care if I died. Right? When I was a theist and I thought I was going to go be with God, I didn't care if I actually believed at the time that I was a Christian that if somebody tried to murder me, I should let them kill me because they could then go on and live their life and maybe find salvation, and that I was already saved. So if I died, then I would go to heaven.
You were okay.
So
yeah.
I felt like self-defense was even wrong for me as a Christian because it denied somebody else an opportunity of salvation, and it was fighting for a life that didn't really matter. Anyway. Do we want to go on, or do we have an audience question? Is that what we're saying? Okay, it sounds like we have an audience question. I'm going to keep the calls on that we have on because we can maybe go a little long. I think we've already gone a little long. We might want to see what they're about and kind of.
Oh, it's after 6, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can go as long as you want.
Let's do. Is there an audience question? Let's take one.
My name is Larry, and I just wrote this down at the beginning of the show. Can you have integrity and also be a Christian, Hindu, Mormon, etc.?
Can you have integrity? I would not say that everybody I know that's theistic is not is a person of no integrity.
Yeah, I don't think it's a determined by whether you have a particular religion or not. I think you have integrity independent from.
Yeah, to me, some people use their religion to serve their life, and some people use their religion as they serve the religion, right? They devote their life to serving the religion. Some people are, the religion serves their life. I'm going to plug a movie that I saw that somebody recommended, and thank you, Kevin, give you a little shout out there. Recommended a movie called The Good Catholic, which is on Netflix, and it's a fantastic perspective of the concept of religion serving a life versus life serving a religion, right? And so when you get into these very, very conservative religious groups, they are lives serving a religion. When you get into people that are more liberal-minded and they're out and mostly doing charity work and mostly doing social functions and mostly just using this religion to enhance their social connections, these are people using religion as a tool to serve life, just like soccer practice or anything else, like that a family picnic or something like that. Some people I don't think really are looking that closely toward the religion, and they simply use it as sort of a mechanism to serve what they're already going to do themselves. So this would be like a person of integrity that basically says, this is the right thing to do, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm sure my God would be happy because he wants me to do the right thing. As opposed to the person who says, this is what the Bible says, and even though it's 2,000 years old and completely reprehensible in what it's telling me to do, I'm going to do what it says because it doesn't matter what I think about it. Even if I think this is reprehensible, God knows better, and so I need to just stick to the book. That's a person serving religion.
That's kind of what I was getting at. Some have said that the hijackers of 9/11 were perfectly in tune with their religion, and they weren't brave or anything like that. They were just serving their religion. Now they had integrity, but
Well, it depends how you define integrity. Just
Hey,
kind of like how you
there you
define
go.
morality.
Yeah, that is the kind of thing. Like to them, they probably would say that they had a great level of integrity in what they did. You know, I mean, I can't speak for them, obviously, but I could understand how someone could put that forward, that in their paradigm of the world, this would be integrity. And this is kind of what I was talking about. Then it's up to the rest of humanity to look at that and judge it, and to say, you know, was that a sincere effort to help humanity? And the reality is, I think it wouldn't be, right? Like, this was a sincere effort to help some God cause. This was not a sincere effort to help humanity. So in my thinking, when you throw humanity under the bus in order to serve your God, you're acting immorally on behalf of your God, because morality is about serving each other. Does that answer the question?
Actually, I think integrity is at the bottom of it all. If you base your life on truth and what can be demonstrated, as an atheist, that's the way I live, then I think I have a great deal more integrity than someone who is basing their life on beliefs that are totally unsupported, such as in most religions.
Yeah, except that I don't think that a lot of people that are religious necessarily base their lives on those religions. Sometimes I don't even think they really pay much credence to what's, you know, what the religion
They
is
have
actually
no
doing.
integrity.
I would have to disagree. I mean, I would not agree with that. I think that they have a particular way of looking at the religion that is different than the way that you're looking at the way they should look at religion. They look at it differently.
It depends what you do with it, ultimately. If somebody wants to build ramps for the disabled, they can do the Texas Ramp Project through the ACA volunteers, or they could do it through volunteers at a particular church. And the point is that they're doing something to help others in need. It's not so important in that case what group they're aligning themselves with in order to do it.
I just don't think that it's as black and white as me being able to say you are affiliated with a particular church, therefore you're not a good person. I mean, I don't think that I could make that statement.
Or even without integrity.
Right. Well,
yeah.
If you were without integrity, I would say you're probably not a good person. But anyway, that's my thoughts. Maybe it doesn't help. We do have a few calls. Can you stay a little bit? Or, I mean,
yeah.
I think I want to announce that we're not going to the dinner. Oh gosh, I probably should have announced that earlier. We aren't going to Star of India tonight because they have some other thing going on there this evening, and so we're not able to have our regular dinner, and I apologize for not saying that sooner. I should have. I actually had it in my notes. So please don't go to Star of India looking for the Atheist meetup. And if you're already on the way,
sorry.
Very, very sorry. And so we are going to take some more calls well, let's just do this. Let's look at them. So we have a couple that have been waiting. Let's go ahead and take William. You're on with Tracie and John.
Hi guys, how are you?
Good. How are you?
We may have answered your question with the prior caller. Did you hear the discussion on morality?
Yes, I did, but it wasn't quiet there. First of all, you guys can hear me pretty good?
I can hear you not real good, but I can hear you.
Okay, maybe I have to take you off the car speaker. Give me 1 second. Okay.
That would help.
So, first of all, I will take a very short 10 seconds to appreciate you guys for your show. I just came up across from it past a month, and I've been addicted watching like 10 episodes, 20 episodes a day.
Oh, wow.
Binge watching.
Well,
I appreciate you guys and your time and your patience throughout so many years and your so many years you put into this. I really appreciate that. Now,
thank you.
With that said, I want to touch on morality again. And Tracie, you have been with Matt on several shows that I would like you to correct me if my general idea of what he presents as morality is wrong, and I start from there. I think Matt is saying that morality is generally subjective with morality is generally objective, but its roots are subjective. So he starts with a subjective morality, and then the application of morality becomes objective. Is that generally what?
I really can't speak for Matt, but I do. My leaning about what I think he's describing is that he thinks that if we knew enough and if we understood enough about morality and about situations, we should be able to come up with better, best resolutions in line with what would be considered correct moral applications. That's and I say that real tentatively because I just don't like speaking for somebody else. But that's my impression of it.
For me, it hinges a lot on what you mean by subjective and objective. Some people say that if we, as a species, kind of have a consensus on what moral behavior is, then that becomes objective if you look at it in that way.
I kind of wonder, though, if your question hinges on discussions that you've had with Matt, perhaps it would be best, and I know that we did advertise the show today as being Matt and John, so maybe it would be best if you called back when Matt was on?
Well, I was hoping, this is my first time calling, and
I thought you... Matt, okay. I thought you said you'd spoken to Matt before. Okay. Go ahead.
No, I just watch. I've been listening to shows that he's been talking about it. But let me ask you this. This may cheer up the previous caller a little bit because I'm one of those atheists, and my mind, when I want to search something, I create problems for myself and then try to solve those problems. So I criticize myself a lot. So when it comes to morality, I'm starting to get to a point that morality doesn't really exist or doesn't really matter. So, but before I get there, I want to ask you this. Is morality something that we have to do? Do we have to do the moral act every time?
Do we have to? No, clearly not. Right? I mean, I think there's plenty of examples to show that you don't always have to behave morally.
Okay.
There'd be no prison. There'd be no prisons if.
Yeah, we would have no need for law enforcement if everyone behaved morally. And sometimes even the police don't believe they have to behave morally. So I mean, this is, I mean.
Okay. All right, got it. So, the way I'm talking about this, and when you say what is morality to me, I'm going to what Sam Harris or Matt touch on is the human flourishing and human wellness. So if I start from there, I feel like just like everything else in life, there's a laboratory condition that you apply something. So morality could be completely objective on a laboratory situation, and then we could have absolute morality, but laboratory conditions don't apply in real life, so then absolute morality won't matter. So let's say if generally speaking, killing is wrong, stealing is wrong, all of those are wrong at a blank page at the laboratory condition, but then every application of morality becomes subjective of time and people. Now, with that said, the question is, do you guys would say, is it moral to kill one to save five? Is it moral to kill a perfectly healthy one to save five?
I personally would not call it moral, but I don't go by the human wellness thing or whatever, whatever that is. I would say that when you are murdering a person, and I think this kind of, this is contextual, right? What if I'm killing a guy who's going to kill those five?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you kill an innocent.
But here's the thing: when I kill a person, am I acting in accordance with compassion, with empathy, right? Am I showing that person empathy, equity, fairness, compassion? Do I care about their life at the point that I'm killing them? Am I putting value on their life?
Okay, so my question will be, morality being a bigger picture, does that person's life matter in contrast with the life of those 10 or 50 in the same...
And I'm saying that to me, here's the problem that I have, though. Earlier on another call, I said there are some people that would say that evidence is bad evidence if it doesn't point to something, and some people would say it's not evidence at all if it doesn't point to something. I personally might not be the best person to answer your question because I am not convinced that it's okay to label killing the guy who's going to kill the people moral. I might call it not moral but justified. So I'm not sure. Like, to me, it's almost like when you start saying that it's a moral action, what you're basically saying is that killing someone is moral because it had a good outcome. Because it had a good outcome, right? Like for other people. And yes. I would kind of personally might lean toward it was still an immoral act because I didn't treat that person in accordance with any of the moral tendencies, but I was exercising moral tendencies toward the people I was trying to save, and in doing so was willing to withdraw my moral obligations to the person who has this gun and take him out because I see it as a justifiable action, whether it's moral or not. But that's me, right? And I can't speak for somebody like Sam Harris and Matt because they start their morality at a different position than I do.
So if we direct the question towards the way you look at morality, do you personally try to do so? It's noble to do the moral thing all the time, but you will withdraw the moral act for like if you were in the situation.
Here's my question. This might help. Okay, like for example, deceit is generally viewed as immoral. To lie to people, to be dishonest, right? We consider that to be something that does not cultivate trust between people.
I agree.
And yet, if I lied to a Nazi to say I didn't have Jews hiding in my attic, and they go to the next house and I save those Jews, the question would be, did I behave immorally because I felt like it was the right thing to do at the time to not treat them in a moral way because I wanted to serve another goal that I felt was also a moral goal, right? So I wanted to serve a moral goal over here, but to do that, I had to be deceitful and dishonest and do things against my moral tendencies with this other person because I wanted to create a moral situation over here. And I can't be moral to him and moral to them because to tell him the truth then is going to throw them under the bus. It's going to mean that I'm literally willing to kill them to let them die.
Exactly.
And so there are these questions about whether a person would say you acted morally by denying the moral tendencies to the person you lied to, as opposed to somebody who might say you were willing to behave immorally because you had another moral goal over here that you felt was more immediate or more important to you. I'm not telling anybody how to perceive that. I'm just saying that for myself, I am not sure that I'm even clear on how I label that or how I view it.
Okay. So I totally understand that. I respect that because the way that's how I think, and it draws me to the conclusion that I'm getting to right now. It's this. So if morality is to do the right thing, not to lie, not to kill, and any action that you are in a certain situation, the action that you take is withdraw from that morality, and I would call it, quote unquote, the right thing, to lie to the Nazi or to kill that one guy. If we withdraw and do the right thing, it seems to me that morality is not an important thing anymore because just on an every day-by-day basis, if you decide not to lie, not to steal, not to murder on a day-by-day basis, but then when the times get tough,
right?
When it really matters, then the time gets tough and the situation gets tough, morality fades away because it's not important anymore, and they're doing the right thing based on the situation becomes more important. So why is conversation about morality that important? If at the
because different people define it. Wait. Different people define it in different ways, right? So, for example, when Matt says he's into well-being, right?
Yes.
Promoting well-being, that's a whole different construct. So Matt's looking at this in a way that says, does it promote, like, is there a way to deal with the situation I'm confronted with that optimizes well-being, right? And so when you look at it that way, you're saying he would probably, I mean, if I was looking at it that way, I would say lying to the Nazis was the moral thing to do, right? Because it optimized well-being.
But the problem I have with that, even when I think about that way, I think, like, if you consider that a moral act to lie or kill one to save some, then you can broaden the perspective, and then all of a sudden there are going to be some context that slavery is good, some context that genocide is good, some context that mass murder is moral. And then all of a sudden, those can be justified as a moral act. Then it becomes questionable. I mean, is it moral that we bomb North Korea first to prevent them to bomb us? Then in context of Matt's or Sam Harris's view, it becomes moral.
And this is why I like to look at those tendencies, right? To me, what it comes down to is, was my decision driven by those moral tendencies? If it wasn't, then what I did was either not moral or immoral, right? If I did the antithesis of those tendencies, I was behaving immorally. If I didn't need to incorporate immoral tendencies or moral tendencies, then it's not a moral, it's not a moral judgment involved. But if those tendencies are not applied, then I'm certainly not behaving morally toward the person I'm engaging, right? That's how I look at it. I know, though, that I'm in like a bizarre minority. Most people don't look at it this way. But I'm like, are those tendencies in play? Because if they're not in play, if I treat John in a way where those tendencies are not in play, and I'm doing things to hurt him, I would say that as a human being, I'm not using the moral tendencies, I'm using the antithesis of them. I'm behaving immorally toward John, although I may be behaving super morally toward a bunch of people he was going to hurt.
Yeah, but the question is, do you value moral tendencies and morality more than the right thing? Which one is more important to you?
It depends on the context. I think that in general, in the normal course of events, it is best for society, for us to be able to trust each other, to respect each other. When we start to treat each other like I'm going to cheat you, I'm going to lie to you, I might kill you and your family, when you can't trust your neighbors, that's a social breakdown.
But isn't that isn't that a norm in society, that if you live a society with no issues, like a small group, if they don't have an issue with poverty or hunger or that, normally they will act moral, normally they wouldn't cheat. So why would morality be an important discussion that if people are not put in a certain situations, like people who steal,
wait a second. I think you're right that discussions around morality generally, come up at times where somebody's behaving in a way that's immoral. You hardly ever hear people talking about morality in situations where nobody's behaving badly.
Exactly.
I agree.
And then when the situations come up, then morality fades away, then the right thing comes in. I mean,
okay.
Normal. I'm not gonna go and steal something in a normal day. But if I'm starving, I would steal. So when I'm starving, I'm not in a general, everyday, relaxed situation that morality matters. At that point, when I'm starving, then morality goes out the window. Who cares about morality if I'm starving?
I understand what you're saying. I don't know what else to add to it. I understand what you're saying.
I think you and Tracie are kind of in agreement there. It's just that some people equate morality and the right thing to be the same thing.
And I think that people would tend to see it as mitigated, right? You're right. If somebody stole something and you found out that they had starving family and they were trying to steal food, you would tend to probably be compassionate toward that person. Even though you acknowledge that they stole, you understand the reasons.
Justified.
And that's what I'm saying. It's like maybe stealing something from someone else isn't a moral thing to do, and yet you were trying to help and you were exercising moral tendencies elsewhere. And so it was like you had to make a decision about whether to behave immorally here or there. And to you, it was more important to be moral over here than it was here. And so, I think that's why we have in courts, for example, mitigating circumstances where we say somebody did something wrong, but they had this really bad situation that changes our view of whether or not what they did was justified. We still see it as wrong. You can still be convicted of it, but you'll probably get like a lighter sentence, or you may get probation, or because we see it as not just being malicious, right?
And that's why it's called
I very much appreciate your show. I know you guys are over time. I really, really appreciate it, and I would like to call sometime back and talk to Matt.
I think you should. Yeah, I really think you should.
Yeah, Matt loves to talk about morality.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How would I know who's on the show?
Usually the schedule at the website is correct. Today it was wrong, but normally it's right.
Atheist-experience.com has the schedule.
Tracie, I really appreciate your time and your show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, William. Yeah, that's why they're called moral dilemmas, because you're balancing one thing that's moral with another thing that's moral, and you have to make a decision.
Yeah, you do. So let's see, there's, this one has been waiting the entire show. This is Randall, who is on now with Tracie and John.
Hey, Tracie.
Thank you for
John,
waiting.
Hey, Randall.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
So this is my first time calling. I'm an atheist. Mm-hmm. And I'm calling because I heard like you and I think Matt had said that you were like Christian evangelicals.
I was.
Yeah, for a long time.
I was conservative, not evangelical. So just to.
Oh yeah, I know Matt wanted to be a preacher himself.
He did, yes.
I grew up as Catholic. I didn't grow up in this country. I grew up in Colombia, South America.
Okay.
Which was Catholic, and you know Catholics are more like you guys are more like let's read what the good book says, quotations, whereas Catholics are like no, let the experts interpret for you what the good book says. So my path to atheism was when I was around 12 years old. In religion class, I was there was a discussion between my religion teacher and another student about a matter. I think it was about the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount.
Right. Blessed are the meek. Just for the people that don't know, blessed are the meek. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are, it's all,
the cheesemaker.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you saw Life of Brian, they made
and they were having an argument, and I jumped in to defend my teacher. And we were like I was defending, and this other classmate basically made a counter argument that was really devastating. Basically, demolished my argument, and I felt embarrassed. I was like completely. I was embarrassed, and I was 12 years old. So when you're 12 years old, you're very vulnerable. So then when I went home and I was like swimming in this embarrassment and thinking he proved me wrong basically, and that's how I started thinking, well, I'm wrong about this, I'm wrong about the same thing, about many other things, but my problem was about coping to being wrong. It was difficult for me, accepting I was wrong. I'm wrong about this, and the difficulty about changing your mind, and that's how kind of discovering that I was wrong about one thing, mm-hmm. and then accepting it, and then discovering I was wrong about another thing, and accepting that I was wrong, and then furthering along until I was about, 16 years old when I discovered maybe I'm wrong about this whole thing about the religion.
Yes.
And but it's difficult. It's a very tortuous path. It's tough. And I'm discovering that a lot of people friends that I know, that they kind of agree with me on some of the reasonable concepts, but it's very difficult for them to accept that they're wrong about something. And then it's difficult to accept that change of mind. I find it difficult to accept that I'm wrong about something still, and I'm 52 years old, and I still things are it wrestle with change of mind, but then you change your mind. You have to accept that you're wrong. And I think that's one of the difficulties. We have I remember, Tracie, you mentioned something about foreclosed identities.
Yes.
Where someone is not open to other avenues. Right. Even if you're presented with something that's very conclusive, mm-hmm. it's just no. But I also find that there are people that they kind of accept certain conclusions, but it's difficult for them to, just accept that they're wrong and that they can change, that it's acceptable for them to change their mind. And I just wanted you to, your comments about that.
I do think it's important that people understand it's acceptable to change their minds. And I think that it's dangerous to have an attitude that you can't change your mind or that you can't be wrong about a thing. And that you're right, the foreclosed identity discussion was pretty much that, with the idea of shutting down on an identity before you've actually investigated it thoroughly. And when that happens, you are less likely to be open to new information, because you will defend that identity in very weird ways sometimes. Because that's when you hear arguments that don't make sense, and you're going, "What? This person don't they even hear themselves? Like, this is such a bizarre thing that they're saying to defend this." And usually that is because they don't really understand themselves why they hold the position, because they closed on it before they had an actual grasp of what it was they were closing on. If a person has a more robust opinion, right? Like if they've got a more well-researched and well-informed opinion about what they believe, that person has more of a tendency to understand why they believe it, so that when you present information to them that undermines their position, they recognize that right away. And they'll say, wow, okay, well, wait a minute, because I was going off of this data over here that I had seen, but if that's not valid, or if there's been new data that changes that, that affects the outcome, right? So then you're more open to saying, oh, let me go back and look at this, because you researched it to get to where you were, and so you're more willing to re-examine it to change it.
Yeah, it's and it's difficult because of course, when you're a teenager, it's even tougher when like you're called out in public that you're wrong and you made a fool of.
It's not. It doesn't feel much better when you're older and in private. It's still not a good feeling. Right. But I understand, and I think most people that have deconverted have had that experience. I don't think that's a rare thing.
Yeah, but the thing is, what I find is that I have friends now as an adult, and I have friends that they're reasonable people, and they're friends, they're close friends, and we have an emotional connection. But even then, I can tell, I can kind of sense, and I don't want to call them out too hard, but I can sense that they're realizing that I'm presenting them a path to reaching a different conclusion is tough for them to accept. I mean, I have a friend, and she's much younger than me, which usually, younger people are more open to
sometimes
change. But she was asking me about why do I believe what I believe, and I said I don't want to be too hard on her, but one of the comforts I reached when I was a teenager was that I came to this essay by Bertrand Russell, is Why I'm Not a Christian. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, I think most people are. Yeah.
And so, back decades in Colombia, this is a Catholic country, and being an atheist in a Catholic country, or back then was very Catholic, is very lonely.
Yeah.
So when you hear great thinkers kind of sort of aligning what you think, you feel comfort. You're like, okay, I'm not an idiot. I'm not stupid. Everyone is calling you stupid, but I'm really not dumb. So I gave her this essay, just to read it, and she said, I really don't agree with it. But then when we delved into it, she really said, well, I kind of agree with this point, and then with this point, and with this point. But in the end, she just could not come to terms that this guy is making the same points I'm reaching, but I still can't. It's a difficult path.
It's a process for sure.
Yeah, it's a process. It's not. You don't become an atheist overnight, and it's not. It's
right.
It's not an easy choice.
Okay. Well, thanks for calling and sharing your experience, Randall.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.
Take care.
Okay, so we have one more call, and I don't have the heart to not take it. So I don't know if you're on board for the marathon. It's not going to be a long call. We'll see if they can do it in a couple minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Okay, Kevin, you have just a couple minutes because we are ridiculously, we've blown the cap on the time frame here. So you're on with Tracie and John.
I was actually wondering if y'all are actually going to keep on going.
We appreciate you waiting for as long as you waited.
How you doing, Tracie and John?
Hey.
We're doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I just want to make this a real quick thing. I'm an atheist, and coming from a family of Christians, it ain't easy. I know y'all know that.
I don't know that firsthand,
real quick,
but
I just wanted to go over a conversation that me and my dad had the other day, and it seemed like he basically wanted to put the concept of parental views on God or something like that, if that makes any sense.
I'm not sure.
Like he was treating God as a paternalistic personality, or he was saying that he had some authority as a parent?
No, basically what he was getting at was like, okay, God brings you into this world and has like a set goal for you to reach, but it's up to you to decide how you get there.
All right, so that's his view.
Yeah, and I me and him went on about that for a few minutes, and we just didn't see eye to eye on it.
Sure.
But I asked him, I was like, so you basically think that God brings you into this world, but you're ultimately going to reach the same goal no matter what.
Oh, he thinks you can't escape it. He's like, this is a hardline destiny that you're going to do. Whether you...
I think what he was trying to get at was like, okay, you have this set goal that you have to reach, and it's up to you to get there, and basically whether or not you get there or how you get there will be judged in the end as to whether or not you get accepted into heaven or get condemned to hell.
So you have to figure out what it is that your mission is,
and
then go do it.
You don't even get the card, right? Like your mission, should you choose to accept it. It's like, no, we're not going to tell you what the mission is, and you have to accept it. Go.
Yeah, basically, like he kept going back to, like, one question he asked me was like, okay, me being an atheist, he said, well, what do you think the purpose of life is? And I said, I think we have to make our own purpose. I don't really think we have one. I think we just have to make it ourselves.
Sure.
And he said, well, if there is no God, what's the point?
What's the point of what?
Like, what's the point of life is what he kept getting at. You know,
I don't know. My cats don't believe in a God, and they seem pretty happy. Right? I mean, I don't see them like, getting ready to kill themselves. They love playing with balls and things. It's like, if life could be playing with, tiny soccer balls and scratching the door frame and rolling in catnip. I mean, and that can be enough to give you joy for at least 10 to 14 years or so, apparently. And I think with a human being, we have so much more at our disposal to make life interesting and beautiful and wonderful. And I think it's sad that they're sad that there's so many people that don't have access to things like that. We have a lot of privilege in some instances to be able to avail ourselves of wonderful things to make meaning, where some people don't have that.
Well, there's one more quick thing I wanted to go over, and then I'll let y'all end the show.
Okay.
And it's something he asked me a while back as far as abortion. And like I said, I'm not going to go deep into this. I'm going to make it real quick.
Well, this will just be the light abortion discussion. Abortion light. Okay.
Yeah. He basically asked what my view on abortion is, and I think it should be the woman's choice whether or not she gets one. I don't think society should choose it for her. But long story short, he basically said that, okay, if abortion is legal, how can someone who killed a pregnant lady be deemed double homicide? I said, you're right, it can't be, because if you kill a pregnant woman and abortion is legal, you can't rule it a double homicide. But one thing I wanted to ask is, if you want to illegalize abortion, then how can you deem it right that later on in this child's life after it's born, how can you deem it right that if that child is unruly, you should stone it to death?
You asked him this.
No, I haven't asked him that yet because I really don't.
But that's what okay, because at first I thought you were asking me, and then I realized, okay, this is a question for Dad.
I basically want y'all's opinion on that. I basically want y'all's opinion if abortion is wrong, but then they want to bring the child in to only stone it to death later because it was unruly. I mean, how is that right?
Well, I mean, right now what they're basically saying is abortion is wrong, and yet when the child is born, we don't want to give it health care. Right? I mean, so there's all kinds. It's once a child's born, they don't seem to care very much what happens. I mean, I'm sure some of them do, but the people that are most vehemently, conservatively anti-choice, would tend to probably not be all that caring about people in circumstances that might need help later in life.
And see, that is something I brought up to him. I told him that, that is wrong, but I just don't understand, all these people who are against abortion, but people who are like very religious. And like I said, he's closed-minded, so I don't like talking to him about it too much because I don't like fighting with him. Mm-hmm. But
well, it was really weird.
I don't understand.
Well, when I was younger, right, I was part of a conservative Christian church, and we didn't really talk about abortion because the Bible doesn't say much about it. And so for me, I actually was pro-choice, and conservative Christian because abortion wasn't like a big issue from the pulpit. We were biblical literalists, and the Bible doesn't say very much about it.
That's interesting.
I just find that to be a big contradiction. You're against abortion as a Christian, but then when the child comes into the world, your Bible basically says that if your child is unruly, you should take them to the edge of the town at the gates and stone them to death.
If you want to understand it, like if you're actually asking to understand it, you have to kind of look at their ideas about sexuality, because their anti-abortion stance is really part of a larger sexual control issue. And this is why it ends with the birth, right? Because then you can't control her anymore using the child. Once the child is born, you can't use it as a tool to control the mother and punish her for her sexuality. And so, I mean, you kind of can by letting her have the child and then making her life hell for having the child, which, if you think about it, is consistent, right? So you don't allow her to have the abortion because the horrible woman, I mean, I want to throw in like a sexist slur here to kind of give their view, but I'm not going to. But this awful, sexually promiscuous woman went and had sex, and now she wants to just eliminate this consequence of her irresponsible behavior. And therefore, we're going to force her to have the child so that she can pay for her crime of sexuality. And then once the child is born, she can be saddled with that kid and continue to pay for her sin. Do you understand what they're saying?
I guess I do.
Yeah, it's not about the baby at all. It's not really about the baby. The baby is an argument that is like put on top of a larger argument about controlling sexuality.
Basically it's like, okay, before the child is born, they're all for trying to conserve this child's life, but like after the child's born, it's like they don't even care anymore. They're just...
I'm saying they don't really care before.
Yeah, that's just window dressing.
Remember the foreclosed identity? They are accepting something there that they haven't really thought through. And what they're actually pissed about is that she had sex. And she wasn't supposed to.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it explains why they don't care about the baby after it's born, and why you can stone it to death, and because it's not really about concern for the baby. That's you're looking at an inconsistency because you're taking them in good faith.
I don't really think it's so much about abortion. I mean, I think it has a little bit to do with that. I think more or less it has to do with controlling women, because I mean, if you look at religion like Christianity, it seems like more power is given to a man and woman, and it seems like women are just put there to serve men, which I think is bullshit.
Well, that's kind of how it started in the Bible, right? I mean, she was the little handy helper to kind of serve Adam. So, I got nothing. That's pretty much it. I think we're done. Well, I think we're going to let you close us out here. Does that make sense?
Well, I do appreciate y'all taking my call, and y'all have a good day.
All right, and I want to thank the crew. I want to thank the audience. And marathon, right? Now, I will say we saved the atheist callers for the end. So for people who were just like, oh my gosh, you went on so long, we put all the theist callers up front. So you're welcome. All right, I think that's it then.
Going down his